But on top of that, please send in any questions you have. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So to do that, you send questions to staff in your chat box to ask questions to the presenters. We will pick these up and we'll try to answer them during the Q&A session in the second half of the webinar. And I should say, if we ask you a question, we will say your name, so please include in the question if you want to be anonymous. And if anything is not working technically, please keep on using the chat box as well to contact Beam. We'll be recording this webinar, so you can watch it again and again and share it with your friends. We'll also provide a brief link at the end for a survey. We have 3 very distinguished speakers today that will be running through extension services and the use of the market systems approach to support them, which I'm very excited about. I will let them go through their presentations, but we would aim to have maybe 20-30 minutes of Q&A at the end, so there will be quite a lot of time for your questions. So let's see if I can go through to the next presenter. I'm still having some issues. There we go. Okay, Kristin, I'm going to pass it to you here now. If there's any technical issues, just let us know.
Thanks very much, Ashley, and good day to all of you. Thanks for your patience as we get the webinar working again. What I'm here to do today is to highlight the importance of extension services and to talk about some of the key trends to more diverse systems of agricultural extension services. But what I would like to do is to start out by explaining or defining what we at GFROS see as agricultural extension services. We define extension services very broadly, and you'll see the reasons why in a bit. I'm just going to try again to go back to this second slide. So we see extension services as the institutions and the individuals who are providing information and services mainly to rural families. Extension services are very much about strengthening technical but also managerial and organizational skills of these people. So we see the extension services as providing the traditional technical and production but also social and institutional support to rural people. And importantly, as you'll see today, there's a connecting role between the communities with research, markets, education, and other actors in the rural sphere. Just to give you briefly some examples of extension services, because there's quite a wide variety of them as we move to the next slide. Slowly. Let's see here. We have some very big public systems such as we have in Ethiopia. A lot of them are focused on production, food security, getting technologies to farmers. We have also some more empowering and small scale, maybe at district level, extension services such as farmer field schools. In Peru, we have them working with potato farmers and linking them to market. Another example is that of private sector advice, for instance, to horticulture farmers in India, where they're providing advice, sometimes inputs, and also purchasing products from the farmers. And then lastly, from the European Union side, we have a lot of advice to farmers that has to do with regulations and taxes because of the policy environment there. You'll find more information at that in one of the links at the end of the webinar. From the World Bank Innovation Systems Sourcebook chapter on extension. So what's going on in extension today? There's really some new interests, so I want to take you back and look at the big picture here, the rise, the fall, and the reawakening of extension services. There's a lot of new interest today for several different reasons. One of them is the fact that we had the food crisis some years ago. There's a lot of new focus on food security, as we saw in the L'Aquila statement some years back, as we see in some of the food security policies of the EU and USAID, as we have seen from the World Bank's World Development Report in 2008, they had a chapter on extension services. The Neuchâtel Initiative, which gave rise to GFROS, and the African Forum for Agricultural Advisory Services have all encouraged this new focus on extension and advisory services today. But what we're saying here is that this is really not your grandparents' extension service. We're talking about a new kind of extensionist or a new kind of extension service. I'm missing a slide here, but because of the new challenges that we see today, there's a lot of new tasks for extension and advisory services. We see a lot of new actors, such as producer organizations, the private sector. There's also new opportunities, such as the use of ICT. And this leads us to some new paradigms, which I wanted to discuss right now. So in the old days of extension services, we really had a linear transfer of technology approach, where technologies were produced on a research station, and extension's role was to get the farmers to adopt them, to extend this information to the farmers. What we see today, though, is a much more messy and complex, but I think a much more realistic picture of how innovation occurs. So this is the move to the more diverse systems. What you see here is an actual innovation system from Ethiopia, and it's not meant to be every actor in the innovation system, but to show the complexity, the linkages, the feedback loops, and to recognize here that innovation does not just start with research, but it can start anywhere in the system, with farmers, with the private sector, and so forth. Another point I would like to make here is that we're not just talking about technical innovation, we're talking about social, process, market, institutional, and many other types of innovations. Several of you have questions with regard to sustainability, and I would like to point out here that when we're talking about sustainability, we don't just look at the extension services, the public sector, the farmer organizations, or whatever, but we have to think about the sustainability of the relationships as well. So based on these changing paradigms, the new challenges that we're facing, what are some key trends that we see in extension today? Let me try to bring up the next slide. Okay, so as a result of some of the research been going on in the past years, we know that there's more than 1 million public extension agents working around the world today. From the private sector, the pharma organizations, civil society, we don't have the numbers so well, but this is a rough figure of extension services around the world. In Africa especially, but really globally, there's a lot of reforms taking place. This includes decentralization, which is serving the farmers more at the local level, putting services, putting responsibility, putting financing at the district level rather than national level. There's a lot of privatization going on, so the public sector is stepping down and encouraging privatization of extension, bringing in other actors. We have participatory models of extension where the farmers are really making clear what their needs and wants are and even evaluating extension services. And we have demand-driven models where the services are actually focused on what the clientele are asking for. And then the final reform we see is pluralism, where we see the rise of new service providers that I mentioned before from the private sector, from pharma organizations, and so forth. Another trend is really the use of tools such as information and communication technologies, or ICTs, where we have weather and market information coming by SMS, we have participatory farmer videos, and many other technologies that are helping to share information and to train farmers. Another trend is the focus on markets and value chains, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that from the other speakers. And then some trends are a focus on different approaches such as farmer field schools, farmer-to-farmer extension, and agribusiness services. My last slide is just to show you now by region some of these trends. For instance, in North America, we have advisory services not just serving farmers or even rural actors, but focusing on youth development and on consumer support. In Latin America, we see the issue of territorial development as precedents where a lot of the focus is on local policies and local processes rather than at the national level. As I mentioned earlier, in Europe, we have a lot of policies that drive adherence to regulations, tax issues, and so forth that are taking place. And this influences not only the European advisory services, but also those in Asia and Africa as well. For instance, we have advisory services trying to help farmers get their products to market in Europe or to supermarkets within their region as well. And the final thing we see in in Africa and Asia is also the rise of cooperatives and groups and the use of ICTs. So finally, what I would like to say here is that I've been able to demonstrate the importance of advisory services and extension in development, in agriculture, and markets, and also some key trends. So for more information, again, I hope you can see the links below, and already we're passing on to Mahmoud to talk about market systems in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Bangladesh. Welcome to the presentation of Swiss Contact Katalyst. We will be discussing on our case of local agribusiness network and analyzing the public extension services of Bangladesh. Myself, Mahmuduzzam, and my colleague Azman Ahmed will be covering the presentation and response to the questions. We'll briefly look into the main contents of the presentation. We will cover the introduction of Swiss Contact Katalyst project and set the context by describing the agricultural sector of Bangladesh. Then we will talk about local agribusiness network model and move on to the role of Swiss Contact in implementing the model. Finally, we will end with the achievements of the model. Swiss Contact Katalyst is funded by UK8, SDC, and DANITA. The project follows making markets work for the poor approach, popularly referred as M4P. The project is working in 3 core sectors and 3 cross sectors. Within the core sectors, there are key topics of focus. And then there is an overarching topic, capitalization, which deals with spreading the learning of this project among the market actors. Now Azman Ahmed will carry on with the presentation.
Hello everyone, this is Azman. I will move directly on the scenario of agricultural sector of Bangladesh. Agriculture is composed of crops, fish and livestock, which is providing livelihood to 25 million farm households in Bangladesh. 60% of these are small farmers with land size of up to 2.5 acres. As you can see, this sector is contributing to about 18% of the country's GDP. What we have seen is that the agricultural sector's performance can be enhanced greatly if modern technology is ensured. That's where the agricultural services, including extension, comes in. In this slide, we will focus on the actors involved in agricultural extension services. There are mainly 3 broad categories of actors in extension service delivery. These are the public extension service providers, the private companies, and the NGOs. Public extension service providers are by far the largest in terms of outreach and human resources, and this is also highly trusted by the farmers. Private companies provide extension services, which are mostly embedded within their products. However, the reach and content of this is very narrow and quite specific. On the other hand, the NGOs also provide certain services, but their scope is also quite limited. As public sector is the largest and the most reliable source of information, we have focused further on the service delivery mechanism of this particular actor. We will now look into how the public agricultural extension system works in Bangladesh. There are 3 public extension service departments, one each for crop, fish, and livestock sector. All these departments have offices at various administrative levels throughout the country. The main delivery happens at the sub-district level. This diagram shows how the department is interacting with the farmers and farmer groups. Unfortunately, the public extension departments are operating with almost the same human resources since their inception, while the population of the country has doubled over the time. So due to limited number of government extension staff, it is difficult to provide services to a large number of farmers. Now, in a sub-district, there are a significant number of farmers as well as farmer groups which are scattered widely. Some of these farmer groups they have a two-way communication which enables them to provide service. But majority of these groups who are widely scattered away, they do not have that kind of a relationship with the extension service providers. This happens because of several constraints which we will focus now. If we look into the supply side, meaning the government extension department, we notice that there are some constraints which limit their opportunity of interacting with the farmers. The most common one is that the number of human resources, as mentioned earlier, available to provide service is quite limited. On top of that, these government officials are also burdened with other administrative responsibilities which are unrelated with agricultural extension, like monitoring public exams, making voter lists, and so on. A lack of proper feedback mechanism from the farmers to the extension departments, it also limits their understanding about the farmers' needs. In addition, there are several policies mentioned in the national strategy paper, but there is no operational guideline on how to implement these policies. Now, on the other hand, the demand side, meaning the farmers, also have some constraints. For example, they lack the capacity to collectively address an issue to the responsible party. Sometimes the farmers are hesitant to approach the extension officials because they believe themselves to belong to a lower social class. And at times, due to geographic distance of the service availability, farmers are discouraged to travel a long way. The combination of all these factors creates a gap in communication among the farmers and the extension service providers. With this understanding, SwissContact started looking in alternative ways of increasing the outreach of public extension services. Furthermore, we focused mostly on optimizing the existing resources. As you know that most of the extension service mechanism has been going on for a very long time, and suddenly bringing in a major change would affect the adaptability. So we focused mainly on enabling the prevailing system. Analysis of the actors within the sub-district revealed that the Traders Association can become a bridge between the farmers or farmer groups and the public extension service providers. The trader associations the traders that we have focused on are primarily in the agricultural sector related business, such as they are input sellers and agri-product auction house owners. Naturally, these groups of traders are connected with a large number of farmers on a regular basis. Also, they avail their licenses from the public extension departments and are also monitored by them. So they also have a good relationship with the public extension departments as well. Based on the scenario, SwissContact understood that with proper orientation and capacity building, this group can facilitate regular interaction between the farmers and the public extension service providers. A question may arise why this particular group would agree to become a bridge between these two parties. It was also analyzed, which we shall explain in the upcoming slides. But first, we will look into what the program did to establish this network. After finding the appropriate trader association, we discussed about the opportunities they can avail by playing a certain role of facilitation. It was not easy to convince the Traders Association to perform an additional facilitative role, but once they agreed, they were provided with necessary capacity building so that they can perform their new roles efficiently. The next step that we did was to conduct a mapping of the existing farmer groups within the sub-district. Most of these farmer groups were formed by different government projects, which became disconnected from getting services when the project expired. So the farmer groups were then introduced with the Trader Association, and their opportunity of accessing services through the Trader Association was also explained to them. Although the traders were acquainted with the extension offices, but to assume their new role, a reorientation for both the sides were necessary. When all the parties understood their roles and started functioning, a smooth flow of communication started between the public extension offices and the farmer groups. There were certain farmer groups with which the extension offices usually reached out using their own resources, but there were some which they could not access. After mapping and linking the farmer groups with the Trader Association, a large portion of the unreached farmers were covered within the network. And this is how the public extension offices were able to reach additional number of farmers without using their own resources. Although the network connected the farmers with the government office, but the mode of this network was quite informal. To ensure that the network operates with a formalized approach, it was important to form a platform where all the relevant parties would come together and plan. This resulted in the formation of a public-private initiative. The objective of the public-private initiative is to bring together the farmer group representatives and the Trader Association and the public extension officer to jointly identify the nature of the support needed and plan for the delivery of timely solution before and throughout the agricultural season. Katalyst developed a short training module to educate the stakeholders as to how partnerships could provide a more supportive delivery model for the requirements the farmers were demanding, and advising how such initiatives could be set up and managed. Following the training, initial planning meetings resulted in signing MOUs, which laid out the roles and responsibilities of each player within partnership, as well as identification of prospective national private sector actors who had the incentive to commit resource to sponsor additional extension events and the production of new materials under various partnership agreements. Where sponsorship could not be secured, the Traders Association would use their own funds to contribute towards more modest events and knowledge transfer materials. In both instances, officials from the public extension departments were central to the events, often delivering them. But they were never financially contributing themselves because their annual plan does not permit them to do activity beyond it. Now let's have a look into the sustainability angle of this model. For the model to sustain, it's important that all the parties understand their incentives. Much of the program's analysis and effort went into clarifying and understanding the incentive of all the parties built within this model. For farmers, it was increased access of extension service. For the extension offices, it was the increased outreach and coverage, while for the traders, it was an opportunity for increased consumer base and social recognition and improved quality of agricultural products that they would purchase. If the two components of the model functions effectively, then the envisioned change that we foresee is that the farmers would have a better access to the services, by applying which they will be able to increase their income. The local agribusiness network of Swiss Contact, Katalyst, is currently in its third phase. During the first phase, Katalyst piloted the concept with the co-facilitator, which during that time was the Asia Foundation. In the second phase, 102 sub-districts were covered in 2 batches between 2010 and 2013. We have segregated the graph to show that the first 60 sub-districts were covered to reach a critical mass, as suggested by the government agencies. Based on this expansion, government agreed to pilot in 20 sub-districts, while the program replicated in another 22. During this time, the co-facilitator was Helvetas Swiss Inter-Cooperation. Currently, in the third phase, a total of 120 sub-districts will be brought under the coverage. So far, we have covered 112 sub-districts. Here too, Helvetas Swiss Inter-Cooperation is acting as our co-facilitator. By the end of the second phase of the program, the model has benefited a total of approximately 210,000 farmers and has formed more than 300 partnership platforms. And with that, we would like to conclude our presentation and thank BIM Exchange for arranging this webinar. And I would like to hand over to Matthias for his presentation. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very good morning from a snowy Switzerland from my side to everyone. I would like to thank the previous two presenters from GFRAS and Swiss Contact Katalyst for their very interesting and enlightening presentations. I'm particularly happy about the Katalyst presentation since this intervention is a joint project implemented together with Helvetas Swiss Intercorporation. Helvetas is the largest Swiss NGO and implementer of development projects. In the field of economic development, the organization is applying an M4P approach in a growing number of projects, but also in other thematic areas. Interest in this thematic approach, systemic approach, is increasing. I'd also like to thank the Beam Exchange team for organizing this webinar and inviting me to speak here. Building on the previous two presentations, I would like to use some of the frames of the new M4P Operational Guide to share 4 main thoughts from a project implementation point of view. I will also refer to the Katalyst case study. Both documents are, of course, available on the Beam Exchange website. My first main point is about defining our objectives. In order to achieve more scale and sustainability, systems that surround disadvantaged groups need to change. In other words, farmers don't exist in isolation, but are embedded into complex agricultural innovation system, as Kristin also called it in her presentation, which in a development context such as Bangladesh, as we heard from the 2 previous speakers, is not functioning properly. The exclusion from a agricultural extension contributes not only to performance at farm level, but more importantly has an impact on household incomes, of course. So how do we go about changing this? Development interventions in agriculture have a common objective: improving access of disadvantaged groups to knowledge and information streams, technology transfer, input supply, or what we summarized under the term extension services. The ways in which projects and organizations have gone about this, however, have been very diverse. 2 points here, perhaps. First, there is the growing realization that direct support provided by projects to beneficiaries generates nice pictures, but poor results in terms of sustainability and scale. Agricultural projects directly implemented via public extension offices have also left these organizations often over-reliant on external support and is often a key constraint towards reacting more responsive to the needs of farmers and the requirements of a changing market reality. Secondly, it is therefore critical to take a more systemic approach, as also illustrated by Kristin earlier, one that recognizes extension services as part of a complex system with interrelations between different players, and tries to change the system. This requires a review also of our own role, not taking an active role, but rather stimulating others to take on new roles or performing them better. My second main point is about our understanding of public extension services and how we develop a focus for intervention. In her presentation, Kristin also mentioned that the understanding of agriculture extension services has moved away from a linear notion of technology transfer towards a more pluralistic understanding of extension systems. In addition to this, public extension services is not a homogeneous model in itself. Many countries have moved away from purely public sector delivered extension services towards a hybrid system that involves private sector and other players and thus more effectively utilize scarce resources. The challenge for us again is to understand the complexity of agricultural extension systems and from this develop a clear focus for interventions. 3 points I would like to mention here. First of all, we need to understand that information and technology reaches farmers through different channels and involves different players. For example, information delivered as embedded service when farmers purchase inputs from agricultural input retailers. The decision for public extension services is therefore one of a number of other possible delivery channels. Our choice needs to be determined by the potential for scale and sustainability. Secondly, we need to recognize the problem at the core of government service delivery. While information and technology transfer is often perceived as a public good, the reality in most developing countries is that government resources are scarce and therefore undermine effective service delivery, as we've also seen in the Katalyst case example. Especially vulnerable and remote groups are often excluded from access to better extension. Due to lack of resources, government extension services perform poorly in responding to needs and changing market realities, as I also mentioned earlier. My third point, therefore, is that it is important to understand functions and rules in the wider public extension system that determine its performance, and the potential for other market players to take on new roles and help to leverage government resources and utilize them in a more efficient manner. For example, the mobilization capacity of other players, such as trader organizations, as we heard in the earlier presentation. The type of challenges and questions I'm posing require an analytical thought process that tries to identify the underlying systemic causes for poor performance. Without this, we risk flogging a dead horse, investing a lot of efforts and money into projects with public extension partners, but not really changing much about how they function. Another factor that we have to take into account when designing interventions is that there are no generic solutions to how to work with and improve public extension services. We can learn about best practices and failures in other countries, but the solution always needs to be driven by the specific local context and market realities. The M4P frames and principles, however, are pretty much universally applicable and help us to think through questions of scale and sustainability within a specific context. My third main point is about our vision for change. A former colleague of mine once said, "If you have a vision, go to the doctor." I would argue, if you don't have one, what is your role as development organization then? The thing is, we don't have an idea. If we don't have an idea of where the journey is going, based also on a sound basis of information and analysis, how can we advise others and fulfill our role as facilitators of change? The vision which Swiss Contact Katalyst, together with Helvetas, have of a functioning public extension system is one where both public and private sector play complementary roles based on their individual strengths, their incentives and capacities. In doing so, the inefficiencies of public extension services are mitigated in order to create a system which is more responsive to the needs of farmers and changing market realities, as well as reaches out to groups that have so far been excluded, again, as we've seen very nicely also in the presentation earlier. For me, there's a key lesson learned here. Rather than narrowly focusing on production-related service delivery, we need to see how we can eliminate the factors that contribute to inefficiencies in public extension. We know that it is unlikely that governments in developing countries will significantly increase the resources available to such services. We know that public extension officers are often not close enough to what happens on the markets. And we know that the performance of public extension services often depends on the whims of political decision makers. So how can we work with the existing system and make it utilize resources and capacities more efficiently? Here, projects can play a significant role in building up a vision of better functioning extension systems. For this, good analysis and understanding of the extension system and the specific context is important, as I've also mentioned in my previous slide. My last main point that I would like to raise is about our facilitation role, especially in regard to achieving scale. Changes in government and public services are often cumbersome, especially in a development context such as Bangladesh. This has several reasons, most importantly related to institutional inertia and government perception of what its own role should be. It is, however, possible to achieve sustainable changes in a government institution, as the Katalyst case study shows. The case also shows how different levels of government have been involved and in different stages. The first stage, which already started in 2006, was about exploring a new model for collaboration with business membership organizations in a few selected districts. A lot of this happened also under the radar of central government. This stage also involved capacity building and sensitization of different roles that could be performed by different market players, such as the associations. Then the second stage came in 2010, when the question was how to scale up the experience made so far. At this point, the central government had to be involved and a policy decision had to be made. The government, however, required more evidence, but agreed to extend the trial to a larger region. In 2013 then, as you can also all read in the Katalyst case study, which was written by Dan Nippard, who I believe is also listening here, the third stage, a policy decision was made to implement the model nationwide as a supplementary channel for meeting the information and extension service needs for farmers across the country. Collaboration with government is never a straightforward matter. I believe that the duration of the Katalyst intervention shows that it requires often a long breath before breakthrough moments can be achieved at central level. In order to achieve a scaling up effect, a project needs to take active measures, such as roundtables, awareness-raising events, consultation processes, impact studies, study tours perhaps even, etc. Sensitization of relevant decision-makers towards new and more efficient business models and the role of other market players requires a careful lobbying process by which also the project should not be seen as taking ownership, but rather encourage others to take the lead. While the time for the presentation has been limited, I hope that I could sketch out some thoughts which may stimulate an interesting debate amongst the participants here of the webinar. I thank you for your attention, and I hand over back to Ashley.
Thank you very much, Matthias, and thank you to all our presenters for these very stimulating and interesting conversations. And now, we are going to move on to some questions. I appreciate we are running on a bit too much. There we go, but you can see all of our faces. Yeah, I appreciate we have a delay here, so we're not going to have all the questions I was hoping for. I think we can probably have one round of questions, potentially two, but definitely one. But I would say that we have been seeing the questions that came in before the webinar started, and I know all the presenters have tried to purposely address some of the questions you have. So definitely, I feel some of those should already be answered. The first question I want to ask, there was 3 questions about the role of gender, but I'd like to send over to Kristin, which are both relevant to the market systems approach with extension services, but kind of more generally relevant. So, for instance, Rupert Hinton asks, how can these be tailored and targeted to women farmers' needs? And Gloria Gumenabassa says, how do we adjust gender rule advisory services using the market system approach? And Karen Chemutai, who I think is having some connection problems, asks, how can this approach be designed to ensure that women in a sector are not excluded or marginalized? So really there's a lot of interest in this question. Kristin?
Thank you, Ashley. I think this is a very good question, and it's an important one to ask because women are certainly contributing a lot within the agricultural sector and could contribute a lot more. GFROS has done some work about increasing gender equality in rural advisory services. But we want to look both at the advisory services themselves and how they can include more women, because we know that women extension agents are better at reaching women than men are. We also want to better reach women farmers, and to do that we need to focus on several different aspects. We need to think about the capacity that women have, the social barriers that might exist in terms of going to market, in terms of receiving advice from male extension officers, in terms of the cultural and family constraints that there might be in terms of owning animals and things like that. A lot of people want to focus on women's crops, and that's one way to do it, but I think it's important that women move into different markets and are able to grow different crops or raise different products that enable them to increase their income and contribute to their family's well-being. Studies show that if women receive money, they tend to put it towards family nutrition and education of the children, which is what we consider a good thing to do. Another aspect is that we need to orient the governance systems that we increase and strengthen women's ownership within organizations like farmer organizations, but also within advisory services themselves. We need to think about ways to increase the number of women professionals who are working for advisory services, and that means considering the constraints that they have in terms of responsibilities towards family and children and that kind of thing, whether we can post them to rural areas, whether we need to think about flexible working hours and just mechanisms within the work environment to allow women to work there better. Thanks, Ashley. Back to you.
Thanks very much. I think we'll have some similar questions coming to that a little bit. I want to come over to Mahmoud and ask now, there's a couple of specific questions about what Katalyst is doing. There's actually quite a lot, and for all these questions, we can look at them on the LinkedIn. But there's two questions, different questions I want to ask you, Mahmoud. One is from Mike Albu, who asks, is there a risk that traders' roles creates a bias in the knowledge exchange with farmers? For example, favoring solutions to agricultural problems that require purchase of high-cost inputs over solutions that they rely on increased farmer knowledge. And we also have from Simon DeGello, in the Katalyst project, have you experienced any negative effects due to biased advice through the traders on new dependencies? E.g., traders trying to sell more inputs than necessary, farmers not being able to decide freely to whom they want to sell their products.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. And thanks to Mike Albu and Simon DeGello. Both are important questions. I think the angle is similar, like the chances of manipulation by the trader of the farmers. Now, I would like to say that without even the network, the traders can do this manipulation. But with the network, the challenge for the trader, the loss of reputation is higher. So that's one check and balance for them. And again, if you have seen the PPI platform, where all the three actors, that is farmers, traders, and the extension officers meet together and discuss, the farmer has always the chance to verify the dosage and usage of inputs, whether it is logical or it is not logical. So this is also another check and balance for the farmers to get a fair deal from the traders. So that is my answer.
Okay, thanks very much. And there are a lot more questions coming through. We'll come back to you in a bit with some more questions on the model. Matthias, there was a couple of questions about looking at whether or not this approach would work in other contexts. I know your work involves you working in a number of different places. I mean, there's a few questions about different regions, but for instance, Torn Riegen asks, does the market system approach, which supports public agricultural extension service, work for all countries?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think in answering that question, we probably also need to be clear a bit on what M4P is and what it is not. Now, M4P is not an approach that actually prescribes certain solutions, that tells you you have to work with public extension service, or that tells you that you need to work with private commercial services or embedded services. The solution is always context specific. But what M4P as an approach offers us as projects and as implementing organizations is more frames and principles, guidance that actually helps us to think through our strategies and see how they actually affect people in the end. So it's not an approach that's prescriptive, but an approach that rather frames strategic questions for projects. And I believe there have been many projects in different countries that have applied an M4P approach to extension services. One of our projects, for example, in Kosovo, the region where I'm working, as I said also in my presentation, it's a pretty universal approach that kind of fits like a rubber band around different thematic questions and also specific tools.
Okay, thanks very much. Time is pressing, so I think we'll try and do one round of questions, and then I'll try and probably bring this to the end. Kristin, there's a couple of questions that are similarly looking at kind of the challenge of affordability of private sector challenge, of provision, pardon me. So for instance, Pierre Cadet asks, how market on-demand extension services offered by private partners can be accessible, affordable to poor farmers? And Kurt Schneider similarly asks, how can small farmers pay extension services? Pascal Bonsom comes in with a slightly different angle. How do you get over the issue of farmers paying for services they've had for free for years?
Thanks, Ashley. These are good questions as well. I heard somebody recently say, well, you can't really complain about public extension services because you're getting them for free. And I think you're right. We do have to change this attitude of getting things for free. And we all know that people really value something if they do have to pay for it. However, many farmers are constrained in terms of how much money they can pay for services and that kind of thing. Studies show that farmers are willing to pay if they do see the benefits. I've seen some research in Nigeria indicating this. But you really have to start somewhere to get farmers used to the idea of paying and to get them to value the services. So you might want to start with some token payment or contribution, just asking them to pay a percentage of the actual costs. You can also ask fees for activities that generate income, such as providing inputs or advice with regard to market crops or animal vaccinations and that kind of thing. Some governments have tried the voucher approach, for instance in Chile, where you could use vouchers to give to farmers to pay for private services, for instance. In reality, that has not worked so well, but it's still something that people could try to explore. And of course, government and policies are still going to always have to cover public good sorts of natures, natural resource conservation, protecting the spread of diseases that can be spread amongst livestock, conserving the landscape like they do in Europe, and that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy to say we have a question that was sent in by the author of the report that we've been we've been referring to so much. So for Mahmoud, that's why I find this question. Daniel Nippel asks, could you tell us more about the expansion of the LAN in new auxiliaries since the case was written? When Katalyst phase due to a close, he believes the LAN model was up and running in around 115 subdistricts, but happily now seems there are over 200 subdistricts. Could you talk more about this perhaps?
Well, thank you, Ashley, and Dan, thank you very much for joining this webinar. Uh, it was a wonderful case written by you. Since the new phase start, we have covered 112 upazilas so far, sub-districts so far, and that makes the total 228. Now, for our new expansion, the positive side is that we had a good experience and we have a good case to refer to the new Traders Association and to the new farmers. We have examples to show. So it helped a lot in expanding to new sub-districts. And also we applied the learning like dealing with the rotation of the staffs of extension offices, and also the acceptance higher level of the officials of the model. So besides expanding our network in new upazilas, we are also working closely with the central level of the extension offices so that this model is taken up in broader geographic areas. That's why we have arranged training for the higher level officials, that is district level officials, which were in earlier phase absent. So we applied our learning here as well. And also there is a module submitted to the central offices of the government agencies so that it can be circulated to all the districts. So that is another learning we have applied now. And the other side is that the new geographic areas are also different from the geographic areas we had been working. The traders here are more cautious about what they are receiving and what they will receive in the future. So this has also implications on our expansion, but as I said, the previous experience and examples help us a lot. So, and I'd like to again thank you, Dan, for your question.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll have to take one more question, and then I'll ask each of the speakers for a very brief kind of roundup of any final thoughts. And this is for you, Matthias. So we have a Ruben Banda from Musica asks, how can market systems approaches be used to promote and sustain public agricultural extension services without distortion?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question because I think sort of the experience over the last years or decades of development support have shown that many projects have done things with public extension services and have actually increased the dependency of public extension services towards development aid. In the Katalyst case study, it's also mentioned that this sort of program orientation of public extension services also leads to these services being less responsive actually to needs and market changes. So it actually adds to the problem, and thus projects often distort the way how extension services actually work. So I think the question of how to avoid that is extremely important actually from an M4P point of view. And I think it relates very much to the question on how we actually define our role. We need to actually define it as being facilitator from the very outset of project design. We are not there to provide services, essential services, but we're there to stimulate others to play new roles, take on new functions. That's easily said and more difficult to do in reality, but basically it means we constantly need to review what we do and ask ourselves the question whether what we do as projects should actually be done by someone else within that extension service system. Now, often the way these extension service systems work once we start intervening in them requires a fairly direct approach. Also from the Katalyst case, we heard that at the beginning a lot of capacity and sensitization had to be done. But we need to do that with the perspective of how do we get out there. Many projects get sort of sucked into that system and start performing roles. So we need to enter the system with the perspective of how do we get out there. So fairly soon also develop a vision on how it would function in a sustainable manner. I think that just requires a lot of analysis and strategic discourse as well in our projects. Sometimes something that I find sometimes comes a bit too short in our projects.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to ask each of the speakers to give a final sentence or couple sentences of view on the webinar, or any final thoughts or responses to other answers they heard. Maybe Kristin, could you go first?
Yes, thank you, Ashley. Well, I'm very excited at GFROS to see what's going on in these new market-oriented extension approaches, to see what's going on in Bangladesh with Katalyst and M4P approaches. I think we really need to see farming as a business and focus on that, because this is a much more sustainable and empowering approach than the old model. So I'm excited to continue the conversation with you, as Ashley's going to explain at the end. Thanks again.
Mahmoud?
Yes, thank you, Ashley. I would like to thank the arranger of this webinar, the whole team, and also the other presenters, Kristin and Matthias. And special thanks to Dan, and of course the audience who, by asking a lot of critical questions, gave us the chance to clarify our thought process and analysis that our program design. And I would like to welcome all of you to Bangladesh to see our work here, and hope that in coming days more questions and comments from the audience will arrive, and we are looking forward to that. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, also from my side, maybe just two small points to add. One relates to the question asked earlier related to gender. I think it's very important that we consider how gender also fits into the extension service context. I think what's important from an M4P point of view is also to see where's the business case here. For example, in livestock development, women are often engaged in I don't know, milking cows, calf rearing, and these type of activities, but extension services often target men in terms of the advisory inputs they give. So we need to be careful in sort of considering the business case, and I think that actually helps extension services then to become more effective, also in reaching improvements at farm level. The second point, very quickly, I think the M4P approach helps us to frame important strategic questions, and I would like to encourage also everyone in the projects to become more familiar with them if they are not already. I think I found it very useful to really think through questions of scale and sustainability. And last but not least, my thanks to the Beam Exchange team for organizing this webinar. It has been very exciting, and also to my co-presenters. It's been a pleasure to do this together with you.
Thanks very much, Matthias. I'm not sure I could say it better, but with this I want to close the webinar. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our attendees. Well, first of all, for your extensive patience, but for your active participation and the great questions. We really hope that you gain some ideas about market systems approaches to public extension services that are relevant for your work. There really was an overwhelming number of questions, so I'm sorry that we couldn't answer them all, and they really kept on coming in. What we will do is, of course, we will email out the slides, we'll email out a recording, so you can look at that, and we'll aim to take this conversation onto the Beam LinkedIn page. So I'll be emailing the people who've asked questions, but you'll get a link to where this will go further. I think we're sending around some links as well, so could you please fill out that short survey? It'd be really helpful for us. I'd like to highlight as well some resources that further delve into extension services. You can't click on the link in the slides, but we are also, thank you, posting them into the chat box now, so you can directly click on them. This includes GFRAS's website, which has an impressive amount of resources covering the various aspects of extension and know-how about new methodologies for implementation. Swiss Contact Katalyst case study that we've been discussing provides a very practical perspective on how a market development approach can support improved extension services delivery. We also have a great deal of resources on our website, so I would encourage you to visit it and sign up for more information at www.beamexchange.org. We'll continue this conversation on LinkedIn, as I said, while the next Beam webinar will be on the use of market systems approaches in the health sector on the 17th of February, and you can register now. Last but not least, I would like to thank our three presenters for introducing us to the topic and sharing their experiences with us. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.